Right. Craig Eller, a little bit about PacifiCorp, or for the folks here, you may know us as Rocky Mountain Power. We operate in 6 states across the West. Our largest market is here in Utah. It's a little less than half of our load. In total, we've got 2.1 million customers, and we are the largest owner and operator of the transmission grid, across the West. It's kind of, again, Utah, think of it as about half of our load. Oregon is kind of the next largest customer. Wyoming and Washington, kind of the tier after that. Idaho, and then about 3% of our load is in Northern California. So we have, again, a big footprint across the West, a large transmission grid across the West, and we operate in total just less than that. We own and operate just under 11,000 megawatts of generation. 3,300 of that is non-emitting generation. So that's a little bit about us. There's been a lot of talk about planning, about load projections, etc. Right? So as a utility in our regulated processes, working with stakeholders, the 6 regulatory bodies, from each of the states, every other year we put out a long-term plan. So this is from our last long-term plan, looking out at what we thought would be a reasonable expectation of growth, again, influenced by third parties, interested stakeholders, state regulators, consumer advocates, etc. If you look over the full time horizon, right, we're going from a little over 60,000 gigawatt hours a year towards the back half, a little over 90,000 gigawatts a year. So on an energy basis, that's roughly equivalent to plugging in an entire additional Utah in our footprint. Again, it's not all here, it's distributed, but that gives you a sense of the scale of load growth. I think for a long time, utility planners saw declines in load growth tied to energy efficiency and all of those different dynamics. But now we're really seeing, load increases on kind of an individual basis, as well as, a lot of industrial growth broadly, and especially, in the data center space. Brianna touched on it earlier, a lot of question marks around how much of the demand signals that we're seeing long-term are, actually going to come to fruition. So this forecast does not include a lot of what we would call kind of early stage discussions that we're having with commercial and industrial customers, including data centers. If we drill down on that and we look at just the state of Utah, the unplanned requests that we've gotten, kind of over and above the projection I just gave, are roughly equivalent to another Utah. So plugging in 2 more Utahs into our service territory over some time frame. So I think there's been discussion around the generation side of that, but the generation can't exist without transmission. And then we get into large kind of chicken and egg questions around the generation is going to go where the transmission is. The transmission wants to connect the loads and where the generators are. Again, on this kind of backdrop of question marks around exactly how much of this should be planned for, who should bear the costs, who should bear the risks if things don't go according to plan, etc. Regardless of how much of this comes to pass, or if we're just serving our existing kind of load customer growth, new investments in transmission and generation are going to be required. There's just no way around it, right? And I think this is where a lot of these new technologies and kind of, other leveraging those in combination with existing technologies is really the path forward. Because of the long-term nature of our planning process, because of all of the interested stakeholders, the utility is encouraged to take a very deliberate, kind of long-term planning process where we put out a plan, get consensus on a plan, procure resources consistent with that plan, get approval on what we procure, then we finally start building things. So if you just think about a construction timeline, all of that process adds a lot of kind of pre-time, which historically has been very good for our kind of standard customers, standard growth. But when we talk about tackling these new step change type load potentials, those processes break down. And so we're very interested in finding ways, leveraging ways that we've worked within the regulatory process in the past to accelerate those to meet individual customer needs. From our view, that kind of has two primary points of interest. So these new customers with new large loads, what do they need? They need tools to enable the timing certainty and often to meet energy preferences, right? A lot of new customers want to ensure that their growth is renewables or supporting, new generation technologies, et cetera. We want to partner with those customers to help them meet their goals. But that raises a question for existing customers. How do we ensure that the risks and the costs of, bringing on specific resources or bringing on kind of preferential resources doesn't lead to a shifting of those costs and those benefits? In our view, we've partnered with customers on similar questions in the past. I think the scale is new. But we have existing tariffs that we've worked with, especially in Utah, with customers to both meet net renewable goals, so the 100% with kind of not necessarily energy production matching their load demand. And we have tariffs that, do a true kind of real-time matching every 15 minutes between, a resource of their choosing and their load. More is going to be needed, right? And again, I think these processes have really unlocked kind of how do we match up available generation with customers that are interested in that generation. But we've reached a point on the grid where any of these resources are going to trigger the need for more transmission. And, we see more and more apprehension around, are all customers benefiting from a particular line? How should these costs be allocated? In our unique case, how do those costs get allocated amongst 6 states, or should they? So these are all kind of questions that we're wrestling here in real time. But again, building on kind of our past successes in those non-emitting tariffs. That's about all I have. So I'll look forward to the question and answer at the end, and if anyone has any questions.
Thank you.